The movie begins in space, where a spaceship, the Red Queen, successfully landed on Jupiter's moon, Europa, and began the extraction of water to bring back to Earth, since the water on Earth has become too toxic to use. Frank, a crew member, reports to Captain Jim that they are making excellent progress as the water tanks are almost full. Captain Jim, excited to return home, tells the ship's computer, Red, to get ready for liftoff. Commander Alex gets a message from Red to make his area ready for liftoff too. At the same time, Red tells Dr. Cat, another important team member, to get her station ready for liftoff. Commander Alex, who has been busy repairing equipment on the ship, receives a message from Red to secure his area for takeoff. Similarly, Red notifies Dr. Ken, another crucial team member, to prepare his station for liftoff. The ship's engines roar to life, and the Red Queen soars through the sky heading back to Earth. Having successfully begun their return journey, Jim records a heartfelt message to be sent back home. He sets the spaceship on autopilot and instructs Red to wake up the crew only when they're 2 hours away from their home planet. As they settle in for the journey back, the crew takes personal time to connect with loved ones through pre-recorded messages. Frank watches a message from his mom, who reads him a Bible verse and expresses pride in the church community's appreciation of his contributions. Kat, another crew member, views a message from her fiancé, who promises to marry her upon her safe return. Continuing their journey, Kat oversees placing the new crew in stasis pods, where they'll sleep deeply for most of the trip. Frank struggles to relax. His heart rate is unusually high. Noticing this, Alex lends Frank his lucky hat to calm his nerves, and after ensuring everyone is safely in status, they all drift into months-long sleep, programmed to wake up just 2 hours away from Earth. But their return doesn't go as smoothly as planned. They're abruptly awakened in the middle of an asteroid belt, and Captain Jim takes manual control of the ship, turning off the autopilot. A tense struggle ensues as they navigate the hazardous asteroid field. Tragically, they lose one of their precious water tanks, and even worse, an asteroid hits the ship, taking Kat's life. Jeff confronts Red, the ship's computer, questioning why it didn't wake them up sooner. When Alex informs the rest of the crew about Kat's untimely death, Jim, overwhelmed with emotions, instructs Red to shut down and hand over complete control to him. But surprisingly, Red, programmed to assess human emotional states, refuses Jim's requests. It argues that Jim's extreme stress compromises the safety of the remaining crew. Red takes an extraordinary step by removing Jim from his duties and appointing Alex as the new captain. After this shocking development, Red disables all power systems, ignoring Jim's attempts to restore them. However, when Alex issues the same command, Red complies promptly. As they assess their situation, Alex asks Red about their location. The answer leaves them stunned. They are near the moon, and both the moon and Earth have been obliterated, along with everyone they cared for. A final recorded message from Earth confirms the grim reality. Nuclear weapons have been activated, and Earth is destroyed. Overwhelmed by grief, Jim storms off, noticing that he's bleeding. Later, Frank expresses concern about Jim's volatility and threats to shut down Red. Alex defends Jim, emphasizing his past heroics. The crew holds a makeshift funeral for Kat, remembering her contributions. They give her a space burial. The atmosphere on board is heavy with sorrow and uncertainty. Alex misses Earth's simple pleasures, like a porterhouse steak. Jim admits guilt over Kat's death, while Alex encourages finding joy in the simple things despite their dire circumstances. Jim remains frustrated with Red and the overwhelming odds of being the universe's sole survivors. Frank suggests finding peace through faith in God, but Jim rejects the idea. Kat was the last woman alive, and Earth is gone. In anger, Jim tries to strangle Frank, but Alex intervenes. Later, Jim is haunted by dreams of his wife. Meanwhile, Alex becomes ill, vomiting and sweating. His condition worsens, and he transforms into a woman. Frank interprets this as a divine sign, claiming Alex is an angel for humanity's salvation. Alex collapses, bewildered by the change. Jim reassures Alex and offers a relaxing pill. Frank sees the transformation as a miracle for human reproduction. Alex, focused on survival, searches for a new home. Red interrupts, emphasizing ship repairs before exploration. Alex struggles with newfound weakness. Jim sees what's happening and offers to help. But Alex, being stubborn and a bit embarrassed, initially declines. Worried that Alex might get hurt, Jim convinces him to accept the help, and together, they manage to seal the opening. Later, as Alex showers, he is disturbed by a vision of Kat in his mind. After his shower, he decides to wear some of Kat's clothes and goes for a morning jog around the ship. Meanwhile, Frank and Jim get into another heated discussion, with Frank claiming that God has given them a woman, referring to Alex's change as a way to continue the human race. Jim snaps back, asking if Frank has thought about how Alex feels about all this. Alex returns from his run, sweating but calm, and tells Red that the repairs are finished and it's time to move the ship. As the engines start, Alex asks if there are any updates on his transformation. Jim admits they're still struggling to find a solution. Alex then turns to Frank, mentioning their earlier discussion about his changed DNA. He suggests comparing his male and female DNA to figure out what exactly happened. When Alex asks if this could help reverse the changes, Frank hesitates, saying he's not sure. Determined, Alex urges Frank to try, recognizing Frank's computer skills. After a moment's pause, Frank agrees to give it a try. While waiting for the simulation, Alex and Jim go to fix other parts of the ship. While they work, Alex notices Jim sneaking curious looks at his transformed body. Alex tells Jim he doesn't hold any grudges, and Jim seems grateful for how well Alex is dealing with everything. Just then, Frank shows up with some news. He asks Jim to go check the simulation results while he talks to Alex alone. Jim goes, and what he sees on the computer screen is startling. The simulation shows that Alex has always had female genetic markers. The discovery makes their already confusing situation even more complicated, leaving everyone to think about what it means for their uncertain future. Meanwhile, Frank confronts Alex, who is now going by Alice due to the transformation, and claims that this is all part of divine intervention. He tells Alice that she has been chosen by God to have children. Ignoring her discomfort, Frank leans in for an unwanted and forceful kiss and starts touching her inappropriately. At that moment, Jim bursts into the room and pushes Frank away. Feeling angry and violated, Alice storms out, with Jim right behind her. For a brief moment, Jim thinks he sees his late wife's features on Alice's face. Worried, Jim calls out to Alice, who is clearly upset by her encounter with Frank. Alice shares that she's struggling to adapt to the rapid changes in her body and mind, expressing a strong wish to be a guy again. Jim carefully asks if Alice has begun to feel desires as a woman, which she quickly denies. She then confides in Jim about feeling vulnerable and helpless, especially after the disturbing incident with Frank. Jim tries to comfort her, promising to protect her and prevent anything like that from happening again. However, Alice notices that Jim accidentally calls her by the name of his late wife, Alice. Jim initially denies the slip, but then apologizes. At that moment, Alice notices blood trickling from Jim's nose, and they part ways. Jim confronts Frank, warning him to stay away from Alice, whom he is confusing with his deceased wife. Frank counters by saying that God has given him a woman to start a new family with. Jim argues that Alice would never choose Frank, to which Frank retorts that Jim is too old to be a viable option for the future. Enraged, Jim punches Frank, showing that age hasn't weakened his strength. Later, Jim finds Alice, and they have a more open conversation. Alice talks about protandry, a biological phenomenon in some fish species where the male transforms into a female when the female dies, ensuring the species' survival. This prompts Jim to recount a haunting incident from a mission 15 years ago on Mars. While waiting for his crew to return from collecting samples, he heard a terrifying scream. Investigating, he found one crew member being sucked underground and another brutally split in half against a window. Panicked, Jim fled back to Earth alone, leaving his crew behind. Alice comforts him, assuring him that he's not alone in his guilt and trauma. She then admits that she's beginning to develop feelings for Jim, but is scared because it feels so wrong given the situation. When Jim reaches out to touch her face, Alice abruptly tells him to stop and leave, highlighting the very complex emotional landscape they are both trying to navigate. Still shaken by recent events, Jim seeks out Frank, who surprisingly offers an apology for his previous behavior. Oddly, Jim seems to be experiencing memory loss, unable to recognize the faces in his family photos. The next day takes an even darker turn. Frank puts an electronic neck cuff on Alice and subjects her to a cruel test. As she tries to escape by slapping him and running away, Frank activates the cuff, sending a painful electric shock through her body, knocking her unconscious. While this is happening, Jim is in another part of the ship, wrestling with painful memories from his ill-fated mission on Mars. Frank continues his torment of Alice, forcing her to say, "I love you," before planting a kiss on her lips. He then informs her that they will have children who will be raised to fear God, emphasizing that her new female body is capable of childbearing. Once Frank leaves, Alice applies makeup and prepares to see him again, but instead, she is greeted by Jim. Embracing her new feminine identity, Alice recounts to Jim the horror of what Frank has done to her. Overwhelmed by emotion, and the intensity of the moment, they share a passionate kiss and begin to get intimate. However, Jim pulls away, telling Alice that he must confront Frank first. He instructs her to hide and sets off to find the villain. Unfortunately, Frank discovers Alice before Jim can find Frank. When Jim arrives, Frank uses the electronic neck cuff to shock Alice, warning Jim that he will continue to harm her if Jim doesn't comply. Frank then presents another neck cuff to Jim, ordering him to put it on. Realizing he has no other option to save Alice, Jim reluctantly complies. Frank activates the cuff with a lethal voltage, severing Jim's head and killing him instantly. A horrified Alice watches in shock and despair as Frank proceeds to assault her, the trauma of the moment compounding her already unbearable suffering. After Frank is finished, Alice seizes the opportunity. She grabs the remote control, strikes him with it, and quickly places the neck cuff on him. She triggers the device, blowing his head clean off his shoulders. Fast forward, 8 months later, Alice is now visibly pregnant. She is sitting with the ship's AI, Red, reading the Bible. Red informs her that he has discovered a way to reverse her transformation and turn her back into a male. However, Alice declines, revealing that she has come to embrace and love her new identity. Suddenly, Alice starts experiencing contractions and collapses, falling unconscious. At that moment, an alien figure emerges from the shadows, taking control of the ship's computer system. When Alice wakes up, she finds herself restrained and hears the aliens confirming that she is paralyzed and ready for colonization. The horror of her new reality sets in as she realizes she is at the mercy of these extraterrestrial beings. The movie ends with the Red Queen AI system navigating through space, pursued closely by a larger menacing alien spacecraft. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.